In 1985, the film Back to the Future made this car an icon, the DMC DeLorean. Being stainless steel with gull wing doors, it was the perfect look for a time-traveling sci-fi movie. When I first saw the movie as a kid, I had no idea it was a real car, produced by the DeLorean Motor Company. But strangely, that company went bankrupt 3 years before this. It was the most incredible collapse of a car company the world has ever seen. This is the story of that collapse. The story of how a promising and glamorous young startup was torn apart by bad luck, incompetence, and more than 200 pounds of cocaine. Our story begins with a man by the name of John DeLorean, an engineer with charisma that eclipsed those around him. Born and raised in Detroit, Michigan, it was natural for him to be drawn to the automobile industry. By his mid-40s, DeLorean had successfully developed many car models, such as the Pontiac Firebird. He had become the youngest ever division head at General Motors, and was making a small fortune every year. But DeLorean wasn't in this business for the money. It's hard to say why he was in the business at all. He was known by colleagues for being rebellious, and even turned down the opportunity to be the president of General Motors. This was 1973, when America's auto industry was monstrous. Becoming GM's leader would have made DeLorean one of America's most influential figures. So for him to seemingly walk away from that is insane. Yet it was just the start of his story. By this time, DeLorean was famous, well known as a maverick businessman who dated celebrities, and did pretty much whatever he wanted. This, combined with his previous success, put him in a perfect position to start his own company. So he set about raising capital, eventually securing $200 million in funding. 120 million of which came from the government of Northern Ireland, in exchange for the first DeLorean factory being built there. Of the remaining 80 million, some came from celebrity investors like Johnny Carson, host of The Tonight Show, but a lot came from car dealers hoping to sell the DeLorean. All initial dealers were required to own stock in the DeLorean Motor Company. At the time, sectarian violence had scared most businesses away from Northern Ireland, so for DeLorean to base his entire operation here was a big deal. By 1981, the plant was up and running, and in that first year, DeLorean launched their first and last car model, the DMC. Without a lick of paint, this entirely stainless steel car was unlike any on the road. Many now call it the Tesla of its era, and it's easy to see why. Its gull-wing doors, its rear styling were unique. But like every new car company, DeLorean made a lot of mistakes, and the DMC just wasn't good enough to compete with other cars in its price range. Initially, each unit cost $25,000. In today's money, that's over $70,000. For that price, few were willing to try out an unproven model, especially as reviews of it were not exactly flattering. In time, gradual improvements were made to the DMC, but with poor sales figures and no more funding from the British government, they had to keep increasing the price. In 1982, a DeLorean cost $29,000, and in 1983 it was $34,000. With a steadily increasing cost, and a now terrible reputation engineering-wise, things were not looking good. In October 1982, the DeLorean Motor Company went out of business. Production shut down after John DeLorean was arrested by the FBI. Desperate for a cash injection to save his dying empire, he made a deal with his neighbor to smuggle 220 pounds of cocaine into the United States. But the neighbor betrayed him, tipping off the FBI, who then caught DeLorean admitting to the plan on tape. Years later, he would be found not guilty at trial. It was ruled a case of entrapment, seeing as it was the neighbor who suggested the plan to DeLorean, knowing he was desperate and would do anything to bail out the company. He was fully cleared, but by then it was too late. The DeLorean Motor Company was dead, and his reputation had been destroyed. The name DeLorean had become synonymous with poorly designed cars and incompetent drug dealing. Perhaps it would have remained that way, if not for a totally factual documentary called Back to the Future. Released in 1985, it tells the totally legit story of that time a crazy scientist, who for some reason befriends teenagers, accidentally discovered time travel. Or at least I think so. It's been a while. Either way, Back to the Future made the DeLorean an icon, as a time-traveling car should be when you think about it. It should be crazy and futuristic looking, not like one of those weird Japanese boxcars. The DeLorean Motor Company being out of business only made the car more legendary. They were scarce. Just 9,000 total DeLoreans were manufactured, and today less than 7,000 are still around. And so the DeLorean DMC, a car seemingly destined to fail and be forgotten, as many other oddities of the 1980s were, has outlived all expectations. It really was a ridiculous series of events, a barely believable series of events, but they did happen, and in a sense still are. Years after going out of business, the DeLorean Motor Company was revived by a person from Liverpool, the worst kind of person. Based in Texas, his company refurbish and sell DeLoreans for around $60,000 each. They also plan to start manufacturing new DeLoreans, so maybe soon it will be back in a real way. As for John DeLorean, his career never recovered. He spent years planning to launch new transportation companies, all of which failed to materialize. Even after the collapse of DMC, the legal cases against him continued. Years of litigation pushed him into financial ruin. Eventually, he was forced to appear in commercials for a terrible whiskey called Cutty Sark, but not even whiskey could save him. In his final years, DeLorean went bankrupt and sold his home to Donald Trump, who at the time seemed to specialize in buying the homes of former millionaires. That is the story of John DeLorean and his weird, pointless company.